Really excited about this week's podcast. Dr. Mac is back on the microphone and why people struggle to lose fat. Struggling to lose fat, Macca will chat about why you're not losing weight, how you can lose weight, and how you can live a healthier lifestyle. Because let's be honest, summer's coming.
Welcome to the Body Science Podcast. As always, the information contained in this podcast is for the information purposes only and is not designed to diagnose or be prescriptive to treat, prevent, or manage any injury, disease, or other health-related condition.
Hey team, welcome to Body Science HQ, the world of fit, happy, healthy. And we're going to throw a little why people struggle to lose fat 101 in right now. Got the man in the house, Professor Chris McLellan.
G'day, Greg.
Hey mate, before we go into why people struggle to lose fat, just give us a little bit of background on you so people should stop and actually listen to this podcast.
For those who are new to the Body Science podcast series, we've done a fair few, right? I think this is our 13th podcast together, which is awesome. Covered a lot of territory. So my background is, as you said, I'm a professor of exercise, sports science stuff. My background is mostly around endocrinology. So my Ph.D. was in hormonal function, biochemistry, immunology, and physiology, adaptations of athletes to exercise and training and things like that. But my key areas of interest are around hormones and how they work within the body with training and diet and supplements and that whole thing.
And you love the industry, like a lot of people.
Yeah, been around a long time, worked in strength and conditioning at elite level around the world. You know, I'm a physio by trade as well, although I try and avoid that. And
I know I've asked you a few things. You were very
and so
putting the doctor in front of you was a good idea because you were not sympathetic to what I needed to know.
No, well, you had a lot going on, mate. But yeah, so that's my background. 25 years experience in high performance. I've been in academia for a long time, 15 years, and as I said, I've got some qualifications behind me. So I practice what I preach. I train 7 days a week. I'm in the gym. That's what we do.
I love it. You do a fair bit with one of the federations too, don't you?
Yeah, I'm closely associated. A good friend of mine is the boss of the WBFF, Mr. Ari Hamalainen. So yeah, I
shout out to Ari.
Shout out to Ari and the crew, WBFF comp coming up in about 5 weeks actually. But I also have great links with the IFBB and the IFBB Pro League and those federations as well. So yeah, I have an active interest in physique competition and preparation for physique comp across bodybuilding, bikini, fitness, figure, the whole lot. So, and that's my, I do a lot of that now, interaction with mainly coaches. A lot of coaches come to me with some questions, more so than athletes. I don't prep people. That's not what I do. Sometimes I can just provide a different perspective on things around, whether it's someone struggling. This is a great example. Someone's sort of hit a plateau. They can't lose fat. The other thing in that industry that's huge and has been huge for a while is, the post-competition recovery, if you will, reverse dieting and why people, dieting, is something that is ingrained in society, right? A lot of people want to lose body fat and, we see crash diets. We know that crash diets don't work. We know that 80% of people or more will regain all of the fat that they lost and then some. And so we'll get to that in a minute because there's actually an established mechanism by which that happens. And we now know, we understand that a lot more. And so, I can give you a bit of information about some research that's happened around that. And that's really important because the body adjusts. And I want to cover off on a thing called, this fat set point, which is really common as well.
Body fat set point.
Yeah. And there's reactive thermogenesis and metabolic adaptation. And so I see people who either struggle to lose fat or lose a ton of muscle when they lose fat because we know that you have to be calorically depleted or restricted. And so the trade-off there is, well, can I lose fat? Can I keep all my muscle when I'm prepping for a show? And that's where you want to be. And we talk about, there's beach lean, there's six-pack on the beach, feeling good about yourself. And then there's on stage peeled.
Yes.
And they're two very, very different approaches. And anyone who's ever done a competition knows exactly what I'm talking about. So the idea today was just on the back of a lot of questions I get, and I'm sure you get them as well. People kind of need some clarity around some of those mechanisms.
Absolutely.
And I figure we can just go through it. We can talk in really general terms because I think there's some pretty simple take-home messages that are common sense. And everyone will go, yeah, well, that makes good sense. And then again, thinking mechanistically, we can dig into it. And I'm talking mainly about thyroid function because it is an enormous body of information that is really, really complicated that I can try and simplify. I don't want to oversimplify it though because it is complicated. So we talk about thyroid function, hypothalamus, pretty much drives everything. And then there's a couple of hormones that are really key to why the body responds the way it does. And that the main one in this space is leptin. We know leptin comes from body fat, right? So, these things are all interrelated. The amount of body fat you have will impact on the amount of leptin that's circulating, the amount of leptin that's circulating.
That's very unfair, I'm told.
Yeah. And so, if I can give people a little bit of clarity around that, then I think we're doing okay.
Okay, well, let's rip in. Let's get back to body fat set point.
Yeah, so undeniably, right, talk to anybody who works in this space, or talk to anyone who's ever done a competition in their life or is trying to lose fat. The undeniable reality is that you have to have consistency, right? And so I think this is where people go wrong or find it difficult, in that people can generally commit to a finite period of time. They go, I'm going to do a challenge. I'm going to do that for 6 weeks. I'm going to train 6 days a week. I'm going to do all these things. And then they get to that 6 weeks and they've lost body fat or whatever they've done. They've achieved their goal. And then it's like this celebration where they binge eat for the next. Let's rip in. Let's have all the pizzas and burgers that we didn't have for the last 6 weeks. Then they go, oh, holy smokes, I've put on all that fat and I just put on another 3 kilos.
Yep.
How does that work?
Yeah.
Right. And that's absolutely going to happen. And that's going to happen because your adipose tissue will responds. And I'll talk you through that. So that's the key, right? You've got to be consistent. And that kind of all leads into this big conversation around, you've got to have a clear perspective of where you are in the world. And by that, I mean, we talk about basal metabolic rate. We talk about resting metabolic rate. There's all these other things. There's the NEAT, the non-exercise caloric expenditure, for example. There's exercise energy expenditure. There's a whole range of that all contribute to your total daily energy expenditure. And you've done podcasts on this with, I think Harriet did one on this a little while ago as well, right? So that's nothing new. We know about that. So I say to people, you've got to have a starting point. You've got to know where you are. And that's where invariably guesswork will get you in trouble all the time, right? So you might want to work with a coach or a trainer or a PT, whoever it might be. But what you need is, and there's lots of calculations out there that will give you an accurate measure of where you are in the world from a BMR perspective. And they're based on things like gender, height, age, and weight. And so it's a calculation you can start off with, right? I hear horror stories, mainly girls, that might be eating 800 calories a day. They're doing 2 hours a day on a treadmill, and I just am mortified.
That's not living, people.
It's absolutely not. There is a difference between BMR and RMR. And so BMR, for basal metabolic rate, that's the amount of energy, I suppose, just to keep the lights on. So the process for normal breathing, circulation, temperature regulation, etc., in a rested state. So that the RMR, so your resting metabolic rate, also will include things like energy expended by digestion, non-exercise daily movements, and things like that. So there is a little bit of a difference. They are used interchangeably, but they are slightly different. So you have to have an accurate caloric intake in place, right? So you need to know, this is another thing actually, and just jumped into my mind. When you do a meal plan, right, people map out macros, right? Yep. Everyone's talking about hitting their macros, and you've got to hit your macros, and if it fits your macros and all that stuff, right? So there's no question that you need to do that. You've got to remember when that's working that, packaged food, right? Packaged food, there's about a 20% variability of caloric content in food with packaged foods.
20%?
Up to 20%,
okay.
Right? So that's pretty decent error straight off the bat, right? So if you're eating all packeted foods, you've got to anticipate there's going to be a level of variability versus fresh fruit and veg, your proteins and whatever it might be. So if you're eating out of a packet, I hate meal prep. Don't get me wrong. I'm the worst meal prepper in the world. Can't cook, don't like it. I'm not interested. I mean, there's a lot of foodies out there who love doing their meal prep on a Sunday afternoon, block off 3 hours of their day. Can't think of anything worse, right? It's not my thing. But you just got to keep that in mind, right? The tip is, a best guess won't work. You're going to have to weigh your food, right? Ultimately, if you want to be really precise, and a lot of people's eyes will just roll over in the back of their head and they go, I'm not doing that, right? Now, there's two different ways of looking at this. There's the people that just want to reduce their body fat, and then there's people who want to get on stage. If you want to get on stage, you've got to commit, right? So you're going to have to weigh your food. You're going to have to measure it. You're going to have to, plan out your meals, and it's a commitment, right? But it's the same if you want to just lose fat. If it's just a guess and it's random, and you're okay Monday through Friday, and then Saturday, Sunday, you go crazy and binge eat, that's not going to work. You're going to go nowhere. So you're going to have to track your calories, and you're going to have to track your intake. And that's more easily done with help. And that's why people get a coach. It makes them accountable. It helps with their check-ins. And you hear this a lot in the industry. It's pretty popular now. I'm all about, I love the face-to-face interaction. I know online coaching is huge, but even, if you're looking at someone in this room right now versus if you're on Zoom or Skype with me, the lighting and so forth, it's not the same. Yep. So I don't do online anything. For me, it's face to face. Anyway, so you're going to have to track and plan your meals and prep your meals, right? Or have someone prep them for you where you know what's in it, because it's really easy to overeat by mistake, but it's equally really easy to undereat by mistake as well. So there's a real commitment there, and the whole flexible dieting thing, macros and all that, great in concept. For me, I could eat the same thing every meal every day for the rest of my life. Wouldn't worry me one bit. But some people like a lot more variability with that. And the whole flexibility thing, the flexible dieting, of which I'm an advocate. I think it's a great concept. You've still got to have a plan, and you've still, whether you're flexibly dieting or whether you're much more structured, it's structured flexibility. Yep. That's the way I look at it. So for me, that's more about exchanging foods. It's turkey instead of chicken. It's something instead of, it's not 5 Mars bars instead of a steak, and I don't think it was ever designed to justify eating ice cream for breakfast. I think everyone knows that. And that was a really, oversimplification of what the whole IIFYM or whatever,
Fits your macros.
Yeah, I mean, it's because everyone goes, people think a calorie is a calorie. It's not, right? For example, if you're having a calorie of fat and a calorie of sugar, there is an absolute variation that occurs in hormonal adaptation.
That's actually a really smart way to put it. I've never heard it explained so simply.
Yeah, so that's just the case, right? So you've got to keep that in mind. And so I'm always trying to keep things as simple as you possibly can. When it comes to losing fat, and I'm on a huge rant here, but I always say to people, find things that have the least impact on your day-to-day. So, because if I say to you, Greg, you're going to have to train on the treadmill twice a day, you can't have any more of the foods you really like. You've got to train in the gym 4 times a week. You've got to do this. You've got to drink 5 liters of water. You can't have more than 1 coffee a day. You're just going to go
all good to Friday.
Forget about it, right?
Come Saturday.
Yeah. But if I said to you, you know what, I'm just going to get you to clean up your diet. I'm just going to, when you have your omelette in the morning and you might have 5 whole eggs in your omelette, just drop 2 yolks out. And instead of having milk in there, have almond milk or whatever it might be, right? So you're still having your omelette. If you can taste the difference between a 5 whole egg omelette and a 3 whole egg and 2 whites, then you're doing pretty well, right? Yeah. So that's what I say to people. Just the stage 1 is clean up your diet. And that can have an immediate impact, right? You're still going to have to track things, keep it nice and simple. People have emotional attachments to food. I'm sure you see this a lot, and that's a big problem. That's part of a really, really complicated conversation around eating disorders and disordered eating, right? Because you can have disordered eating and not have an eating disorder. You might have some sort of emotional attachment to whatever, your go-to, whatever it might be, chocolate, whatever it might be, right? So that complicates things, but I'm all about minimizing things rather than excluding things. Because if I say you cannot do something, you say, yeah, okay, you'll do it. You might do it for 5 days. Yep. You might even get through a month, but eventually you'll go back and do whatever you want because it gets boring, right? The other thing I say to people is, okay, so meal prep by yourself or someone else who you trust and you know what's going in there is a must. I always say to people, don't get hungry and never shop when you're hungry, right? I don't know if anyone's ever been to Coles when you're starving. It's a bad look, right? Because you go, yeah, I'm going to smash that. And you walk out with $300 worth of groceries, that you should never have bought. But anyway, so that...
And they have some very intelligent people making sure you do that too.
Right? Yeah. But, product placement is a art, right?
Exactly.
It's a science, actually. So, and I say to people, pack for emergencies, right? So particularly, and the meal preppers of the world and the people who've competed know exactly what I mean. It might just mean a pack of Body Science birthday cake balls in your bag.
How good are they?
They're about as good as it gets,
they're as good
mate.
as they
absolutely.
get. Yeah.
Or it might be the cookies and cream, whatever it might be. It's your go-to emergency so that you don't, find yourself, you've got to drive back.
In a service station.
In a servo, yeah.
Exactly.
And even in a servo,
do you love a good sausage roll though, mate?
Well, you can't.
Can you make a diet one?
I don't think they do they? Do they make a low GI sausage roll? That's where your beef jerkies come in, right? So there are some choices in servos where you can actually make some decent choices without, walking out with
chocolate milk and a pie.
Chocolate milk and a pie, yeah. I've talked about I don't want to get into the eating disorders things because I think that's a really specialised area. And
mate, can we tap on one bit there? What are the things people need to look out for? Like if you've got an eating disorder, you go see a dietitian or a doctor or some medical practitioner.
Well,
what are the things to look out for though to go, oh wow, I've got a disorder?
I think just unhealthy preoccupations with food and obsessive behaviours. So for example, I'll give you an example.
Are you talking about denying you ate the chocolate yet eating chocolate every day, that type of thing when you're in conversation?
No, I'm talking about, let's say you go out to dinner,
yep,
right? The person you're having dinner with orders a burger, right? And then pulls out a set of scales, deconstructs the burger, has a quarter of the patty, has a half of the lettuce, has half of the bun, and weighs that. Now look, if they're deep into a comp prep and they really want that, then you would go, okay, I kind of get it. But if you say to that person, hypothetically, are you prepping for a comp? And they go, no, I do this every day. To me, that's a little bit over the top. I don't know if that's a thing that you see a lot, but I would think think that's pretty over the top.
Tough gig dating these days.
Super tough, right? Do people even date anymore? I don't even know.
So
right?
that's the thing, mate. Like if you're at that level and you're not in a comp and you're that extreme, go and talk to
I think
someone.
extreme behaviours, obsessive behaviours, just this total preoccupation with food. I think there's absolutely justification for making good food choices and all that sort of thing. But, if people refusing to eat or then I think it's hard for me to give you one example, but anything that a little light bulb goes off and go, you know what, person X, there's some pretty unhealthy behaviours there around what they're doing, but there's some healthy behaviour. People who meal prep will be absolutely committed to their nutrition, and people do that year round, and that's I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about almost this feeling of dire consequences if they stray away from that. Like if I have a meat pie, the world's going to end. It's not. You're going to be okay. Anyway, and the other thing is in this, because I think when it comes to fat loss, you've got three things in your arsenal, well, maybe four things in your arsenal. You've got nutrition. I'd probably put supplements under the nutrition piece, but you could probably say supplements are another sort of weapon in your arsenal. You've got your training, and at the far end of the spectrum, you've got pharmacology and drugs, right? And so people want to lose fat fast, right? So often they might go to their GP and they might ask for a Duramine or whatever it might be that will help them, basically just offset hunger and enable them to try and lose fat fast.
Run on the treadmill.
Well, that's your other option, right?
Duramine.
Yeah. So, but I come back to the tasks that are least impactful on your day. So what might that look like? So it might be, a simple tidying up of your diet. It might be something like following a meal plan with a level of flexibility that allows you to choose different foods, which, often, and the good coaches out there will say, okay, Greg, you can have 200 grams of chicken, or you can have fish, or you can have whatever. So you've got a flexibility there that you can decide. So it's not just coach said I must eat this, and this. So I think people want some ownership of that. You've got to be in a caloric deficit, right? We talked about a fat loss in a podcast, right? So you need to have that caloric deficit. So once you've cleaned up your diet, once you've got your meal plan in place and you know what you're doing in that regard, then it's about, cardio is probably the next go-to, right? So what I find people will do, it's a shotgun approach. They'll go, okay, Monday I'm going to start and I'm going to turn my life upside down with my meal prepping, and I'm going to do the full tilt with that, and I'm going to do 2 lots of 40 minutes on the treadmill twice a day at the same time, and I'm going to be in the gym 5 nights a week doing my strength, and I'm going to smash some pharmaceuticals or whatever. Like it's a whole shotgun approach. And I just go, 2 things. One, you have no idea which one of them is actually really helping you.
Absolutely.
And you got to think long game with fat loss. I think I know it's not a sprint, right? People want to lose fat quick, but I'm going to talk about.
You didn't put it on overnight.
No, you didn't put 10 kilos on overnight, right? So you're not going to lose it overnight either. So that's where I'd say, look for some strategies there, because we know, and this is way back in terms of what we know about, like there's 7,200 calories in a kilo of fat, right? So I always say to people, okay, let's not try and lose 10 kilos in the first week. What does that look like? So that looks like a 500 calorie deficit a day to lose half a kilo a week. So 7 times 500 is 3,500 calories. If you go into a caloric deficit of 500 calories, either in the form of nutrition and exercise or a combination of those, so that's only, you can bang out, if you do 40 minutes on a treadmill, walking at 6.5 kilometers an hour, you're probably about 200, maybe 220 calories. And so then, it's pretty easy to manipulate a couple of hundred calories out of your diet with good food choices. So you do that, 500 calories, you do that 7 days a week, or maybe you adjust it so that on one day of the week, you've got a little bit of room to move. Then you can expect to lose maybe half a kilo a week. Yeah. So sure enough, it's going to take 10 weeks to lose 5 kilos, but I keep coming back to this consistency theme, you'll get there.
And you haven't made a massive change to your life.
So they're not massive changes.
This is something you can do every day for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important thing, because like I said, if you start coming into saying you've got to turn your life upside down, you've got to do all this crazy stuff, it's not going to work. I always tell people to keep their protein up, and I'm an advocate of high protein diets.
Me too.
I've read a lot. I'm not convinced that there's any of this really negative impact with high protein. So I'm talking 1.5, maybe 2 grams per kilo. So on the upper end of the spectrum for males and females, around that, to at least, I'm actually a little bit higher than that, but I think that,
I thought you would have been.
I am, but
I thought you were bullshitting me.
I'm being pretty conservative because you want to maintain muscle mass, right? And now people go, you got to keep your muscle because you got to keep your metabolism up, right? Muscle, absolutely yes. Lean muscle mass or lean body mass will have an impact on metabolism, but it's not like 20%. It'd be 2 to 3, maybe 4%. So, but you got to keep muscle, right? It's really important for everything in life. One of the things that I find with women in particular is underfueling is a huge issue So
Why do you think that is?
well, I think because women are told you've got to drop your calories. Someone came up with this 1,200 calorie thing. I don't know where they plucked that from. And then someone else said, you've got to drop. Like I said, I know girls on 800 calories a day. That's just madness to me. Yeah, it could have been anyone that came up with 1,200 calories a day. That's just rubbish to me. I don't accept that for a minute.
Yeah, Harry did a podcast on it.
Okay.
I think it was called the 1,200 calorie diet.
So one of the things, one of the things we see when women are underfueled, the negative consequences of that are the things that I see a lot around loss of menstrual cycle, a whole range of issues with hormonal regulation, estrogen, progesterone, the whole works, right?
Yep.
Now, there's a bit of and it's way off track perhaps, but there's a bit of a misconception that females only lose their it's called amenorrhea. They lose their menstrual cycle when they're super lean. That's not true.
Okay.
It's a fueling thing. So girls will lose their period when they're dramatically underfueled. You don't have to be shredded. It's a fueling issue. But see, what we see is it's kind of like, remember, there's a thing called the female athlete triad, which is an interrelationship between menstrual dysfunction, effectively low availability of fuel or underfueling. You throw that in with a bit of disordered eating that may or may not be a true eating disorder, and then you see problems with bone mineral density.
Yeah.
And one of the things we see with bone mineral density, there are some periods in life where you have these peak, like bone density periods, and one of those periods is in the late teens and into your early 20s. Now, a lot of girls I see are in their late teens and in their early 20s who are pursuing athletic endeavors, who are calorically restricted, training the house down, haven't had a period in 12 months, and they've been, I don't know, misled.
The long-term effects of that are
Huge, massive dramas with osteoporosis and osteopenic problems later in life, because those periods of life, the only thing that offsets that a little bit in those women is that they strength train, and that'll save them, because if you can strength train, that'll help a lot with your bone mineral density. Anyway, kind of off track. So one of the things I was talking about was this concept of body fat set point. So unfortunately, you got to choose your mum and dad pretty wisely, right? It'll have a lot to do with where you end up in life.
Didn't have a lot of say in that.
No, I know, right? I'm being a little bit facetious. But so it's been around since the 1950s. So it's not that new. And it's effectively, the whole point is around this homeostatic environment that regulates our body fat mass. So you would have, what would be your weight range that you fluctuate between? If you just go about your day to day.
87 kilos.
No, it's a serious question, Gregory.
Mate,
what would you be? Like if you didn't...
100 to 105 is a happy place for me.
Yeah.
50, old. But can blow out to 110, 113 really easy.
How high is the highest you've ever been?
Oh, I would have been... I've probably tapped 120.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And what? So you're traveling pretty nicely at the moment. Where are you at the moment? what are you? You're under 100.
No, mate. I'm about
you?
about 104 and a half or something.
Okay. It's a quality 104.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
But you're what? 6 foot? How tall are you?
6'1".
6'1". Yeah. So it's a quality.
But mate, I'm going to be honest. Like when you said earlier about have a pie, the world won't explode. I had a pie last week. It was beautiful.
And did the world explode?
No, I was a happy human.
No, but you've mentioned to me how because you've been on the keto diet for.
And
some time.
I traditionally go keto unless I've had a big night. The next day I'm not very good at keto.
Yeah, but you've mentioned to me that I think when you went off it, you put on
the rebound was terrible.
Quick. Yeah, and that's pretty classic, right? And I'll tell you why in a minute. But I'm interested. So this fluctuation range, because I'm about the same. I fluctuate. I'm 5'7", but I'm around 10.
Yeah, but you're a weapon.
Well, I'm 105.
Have you seen him lift in the gym? He lifts heavy.
Thanks, Gregory. Yeah. But I'm the same. But I've been as high as 123, and then on stage, I only did one bodybuilding comp a long time ago. I was 90. So but we've got this set point, right? That is, and it's really hard to substantiate what that looks like, but it's indicative of a whole range of things. Genetics, some physiological mechanisms that are very individual, but they're all linked towards adipose tissue.
Can you reset that?
Yeah, you can. Well, yes, you can.
Yep.
And this is what I want to talk about.
Okay,
because
it's
not easy to reset. It's actually your body will fight against you to keep you in that set point. Now, you can reset it either high or low. So if you let's say that you become obese and you are obese for 10 years, your body wants to stay obese.
Well, thankfully my BMI says I am.
Right. Me too, right? It's just, but we know that BMI is not worth anything, right? So you have this, there is a settling point, which is what you've talked about, which is around the 104 you said, or ballpark-ish. And that's where, you just live your life day to day, right? So the problem for a lot of people is that they will undertake a diet, they will lose some fat, they'll go off that diet, and their body will fight against them to come back to that set point.
Absolutely.
And it's really classic. The driving mechanism, or one of the key features associated with this is leptin. Now, it's a really big player in metabolic rate and hunger. Remember, leptin is our satiation hormone. I'll get there eventually, right? So it has an impact on hunger, and it will work to maintain that set point against you. So you're thinking a thermostat in a room, right? An air conditioning unit. You might set it between, we're in Australia, so we'll talk Celsius, but between, say, 22 and 24 degrees Celsius. Once the room heats up, let's say it heats up to 26 degrees, the system kicks in, and think of that system as your metabolism kicks in, and you will come back down to that set point. Likewise, if it gets cold in the room, the thing will kick in and heat up, right? So it's working on a thermostat. It's a really oversimplification of it, but that's the basic principle.
It's a 101 day.
Yeah, that's a 101 day. And so when you think diet, right, let's say you diet. We know we've talked a lot about fat, right? Fat cells expand and shrink. They can multiply, but I don't care whoever tells you this, they don't go away. There's only one way to remove fat cells from your body. It's called liposuction, and it's an invasive procedure, right? So they shrink and they expand. And we know that they'll expand to about 400% of their size, and then they multiply. And we've talked about this. Are you good?
We have, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So think diet, fat cells shrink. What happens when fat cells shrink? Leptin drops, right? My hunger goes up, right? So my metabolic rate will drop as well. My hunger will increase, and it's doing that to try and increase my fat mass because I want to stay fat. That's what my body's telling me. Now, when you gain fat, you would like to think that it would work the opposite way, but it doesn't. You're hungry because you're fat.
Yep.
You're not fat because you're hungry.
Yep.
Yeah, and we've talked about that as well. There's an interesting study, and there's a guy in the nutrition space, Lane Norton.
Yep.
I don't know if you've heard of Lane.
I have.
But Lane's got a big profile, and he does a really good, I like to give credit where it's due, and he gives a really good overview of a study that was done in rats. But again, let's take it as something that we can learn from. He does a really good overview on his YouTube site, actually. I know this is a body science podcast, but
mate, he's one of the men.
Props to him.
Yep.
So, but anyway, he talks about this study that was done, and it's about what's called, you remember when we talked about fat, we talked about pre-adipocyte proliferation. So when we have fat cells, before a fat cell becomes a fat cell, it's called a pre-adipocyte, and it can have the capacity to differentiate into different types of fat. We know white fat, brown fat, et cetera, et cetera. We know with subcutaneous fat, we've got visceral fat. Visceral fat's your nasty fat, that has a lot of comorbidity problems, right? Remember all that. Okay. If people want to listen to our fat podcast, we did that some time ago.
That was early in the piece, I think,
But I mean, we don't need to go back through that. There were these rats, right? Now, they weighed about 700 grams. They had about 37 million fat cells, and the size of their fat cells was about 103 microns. Now, that's not really important, right? But they put them on a calorically restricted diet. And so the rats lost fat. Okay. So they lost about 600 grams of about about a seventh of their body mass.
Wow, that's a fair diet.
Yep. So their fat cells didn't really change. The total number of fat cells didn't change, right? Because we know fat cells don't change, right? But the size of the fat cells reduced to about 86 microns, right? So they shrunk, which is what you would expect, right? So then what happened was they let the rats are feeling pretty good about themselves, right? They're looking good in the mirror.
Ready for summer?
Yeah, they're ready to roll. They're ready to go on the beach. So then what they allowed the rats to eat ad libitum whenever they wanted, right? Okay. And so they had low leptin, so they were hungry rats, right? So they ripped in and they started to overfeed. Right? What happens? They end up with what we call a high or a positive energy flux. So they had a surplus of calories, right? What happened? They put on some weight, only about 20 grams. So they went up to about 620 grams, but their number of fat cells increased to 55 million. So we started at 37 million.
Wow.
We're now at 55 million. Now, the size of the fat cell only stayed around 80 microns, right? So they were little, but there was lots more of them.
Yeah.
Nearly 20 million more of them, actually about 30% more fat cells, right? So they'd only relapsed about 20 grams of their weight.
Yep.
The size of their fat cells stayed the same, but they increased by actually almost 50%. Millions. Wow. Right? So what had happened was there was this pre-adipocyte differentiation. So the body's gone, okay, whilst we're calorically reduced, we have to, it's almost like primal starvation mode protection. Okay, if you're going to starve me, I'm going to produce more fat cells. So that happened because they had an improved ability to store triglycerides, which is fats, right? Okay. So then what happened was they let the rats continue to eat, and they continued to do so. Now they did that until they returned to their original weight, which was 700 grams. 700 grams, we got 55 million fat cells now, but they got bigger. So they went up to 94 microns.
So each cell got bigger.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we started at 700 grams, 37 million cells. They were about 100 microns. Now we're back to 700 grams, but we got 55 million fat cells, but they're back to 94 microns.
So at first they multiplied, then they
expanded. Yeah.
Nasty.
But it gets worse.
Okay.
Okay, so they're back to their original fat mass, right? Weight, I should say. They're back to their original weight. Now, what happens is they didn't stop gaining weight is probably what I'm getting at here. So leptin didn't normalize. So they kept going, right? So they went up to 740 grams, right? Because they just kept eating. They ended up at 55 million cells, but they ended up at their original 103 microns, right? So
we're back.
They went back to where they started.
Yeah.
But they went back to the start
with
of
a
the fat
whole
cell
lot of new
size.
friends.
With 20 million more friends.
Wow.
Now that happens that's what we're talking about in humans. Right? This is this rebound effect that happens. So
that's nasty.
Now, because the body defends the size of the fat cells, right? So they kept going until they got to 103 microns. Now that's a really troublesome scenario for anyone who's been on a diet or anyone who's done a comp and been on stage and they binge eat.
Yeah, wow.
It's a big problem. Now, I
know.
What
period was that over, do you know?
Oh, I'd have to check. It was months.
Months, so it was a long term.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So it was a life change.
It took some time. Yeah.
Okay. Didn't happen with one pie on the weekend.
No. I mean, they had to, it took several weeks in each stage.
But that's all several weeks, like it wasn't...
Not a year or anything crazy.
Wow.
No, it happened pretty quick.
Okay.
That in itself, I know it's a rat study, right? But this explains, or we can extrapolate the same thing in humans.
Explains so much,
right?
Yeah.
Your body's going to fight to get back to where you were, right? So we call this, I tell you what I see, you talked about can you adjust it? And the answer is yeah, you can. I see people who've competed for a number of years. So like if you see people who get lean and stay lean, and they stay lean for a long period of time, then I often find that you'll actually see an entire change in their whole muscle structure and how like their frame and everything. Now, I can't base this on any science, but my best guess with this is that the way to adjust your set point is to lose an amount of fat, let's say 5 kilos. The key is you've got to keep it off for at least 6 months.
6 months.
I reckon it's 6 months. It can't
so not 7 days, 6 months.
No, you got to keep it off for 6 months. Then you got to lose another 5, and then you got to keep that off for 6 months.
Oh, okay.
And then you lose another 5,
and
then you got to keep that off for 6.
Wow.
That's how you do it.
We're at 18 months now.
That's to lose 15 kilos.
Yeah. And reset.
Yeah.
So live happily at 15 kilos lighter.
Yeah. It'll take you nearly 2 years,
wow.
I reckon.
Yep.
Ballpark. And even then, your body's still going to have the same number of fat cells as when you started. It's got a memory, right? So you can't ever just go back to eating pies every meal because you will.
And I agree, you can't do that every day. But
no, you can't. But you
don't
can do it
panic
sometimes.
If you do it once, though, guys. It's a long term.
Yeah. I actually think, and one of the reasons people get into so much trouble when they diet is the first thing that goes out the window when you diet is your metabolism, right? So people think your metabolism stays constant. It doesn't. It goes through the floor, right? And I mentioned this before the podcast. A 10% reduction in body mass will drop your metabolism by up to 25%. It's not a relative measure. So you might drop your fat mass by 10 kilos or 10%, but you've got to factor in that my metabolism just dropped by double that.
Wow.
So you've got to keep that in check. I'm a massive fan.
It's not simple, is it?
No. It's commitment, man. You've got to be committed.
And that's that consistency word you used about.
Yeah. And I'm a big fan of, if you take it right back to the old Joe Weider back in the days of muscle confusion techniques. So if you want to develop muscle mass, you can't do the same workout every day, right?
Yep.
You just go nowhere. You'll plateau, and we call it accommodation, right? So I'm a big fan of diet confusion. So you've got to mix it up. That's why I'm a huge advocate of carb cycling, because I think if you just do, one approach, let's say you drop your carbs out and you drop your calories out, your metabolism goes through the floor, and you will, I use the coal station example, right? If you're burning 2,000 calories a day, for example, and you only give your body 1,200 calories a day, it can't burn 2,000 calories because you're only giving it 1,200. So the mechanisms, mitochondrial function and efficiency will drop to 1,200 calories a day. It'll actually drop below that.
Okay.
So then what happens is you get off your diet and you go back to 2,000 calories a day. Your system can't handle that, right? So that's called a surplus.
Yep.
What am I going to do with surplus? I'm going to store it as fat, right? And so you'll rebound every time from that. So, but if you have this, if you don't allow your body to adapt, right, it won't. So if you've got carb cycling throughout your day and you've got high, moderate, low days and that sort of thing, then your body will be in this constant, I'm oversimplifying this hugely. This is this diet confusion thing that I like, and whereby I'm not exposing my body to one approach for an extended period of time so that it accommodates. So I'm constantly mixing it up. And I think that's kind of something that might be, maybe someone listening to this goes, you know what, that might be a decent idea. I'm still staying within my caloric plan. I'm still staying on my meal plan, but I'm going to modify, maybe a low carb. A lot of people know exactly what I'm talking about here. A low carb day where you feel shitty, right? And then you might cycle your high carb day around your legs workout or your full body workout or your big hit session. And then you've got another day where it's, I don't know, smaller muscle group or something like that. So you're doing less cardio, whatever it might be. So then you have your moderate carb day and you just cycle like that. Classic muscle confusion. Anyway, that's part of body fat set point. Comes back to two terms, metabolic readjustment and adaptive thermogenesis. They're the two things really trendy. Everyone's talking about them at the moment. And I know I'm rambling on a fair bit, but I just want to cover off on a couple of things. I want to talk about leptin. I want to talk about thyroid hormones. So the metabolic readjustment side of thing is just the pushback point. This is just the body goes, you know what? I've reached a pushback point where I'm not going to lose any more body fat. I'm going to, and I see this all the time where people drop their calories lower, nothing happens. They do more cardio, nothing happens. It's called, it's your pushback point. And you've got metabolic damage, or you're in trouble when you've got no energy, no enthusiasm, you're at a weight loss plateau. If you're a female, you're amenorrheic. So you've got no period, your estrogen's in the floor, so you've got risk factors for OP later in life, you're underactive, or you've got your T3, T4, so your thyroid hormones are down. I've got no libido, low testosterone in men and women. My sleep's terrible. I can't get to sleep, and then I've got disrupted sleep. I've got elevated ghrelin, so I'm hungry all the time, and I've got low leptin because my fat stores are low. So nothing's switching off my hunger thing. So I'm hungry all the time. I can't sleep. I can't train. I've got no sex drive. Life's not good.
No, that's not a good life.
Anyway, so that tells me that you're metabolically compromised. And so the other thing that drops there is your performance. So your workouts start to go through the floor. You start to lose muscle mass. You're irritable.
You probably start to lose friends too.
Yep. And then everything starts to look like a hamburger. You get a preoccupation with food, the old Pavlov's dog, you start to salivate every time you drive past the Macca's. Anyway, so, because that's the strategy, right? When you're metabolically compromised, your coach says, well, sorry, it's more cardio and it's less calories. And you go, please, how much lower can we go? Yeah. And this is what I see in bodybuilding all the time. And you end up, people lose a ton of muscle to get on stage. Anyway, I'm kind of all over the place, but so that's what you keep in the back of your mind, right? You go, okay.
So what are you doing in that instance?
Well, this is what you know what you got to do. You got to have more calories.
Yep.
So the key to the amenorrheic position is adequate fueling, right? You get some fat in your life.
Yep.
Like you can't, this is the thing, you can't be on stage peeled year round and expect to sort of not have some consequences as a female. You're not supposed to be 8% body fat as a female, unfortunately, although you might want to be, in that sort of shape. That's pretty low. The secret or the answer is refuel.
Yep.
Get some calories in your diet. Get some fat in your diet. Get some carbs in your diet. Now, that doesn't mean throw everything out the window and go back to just eating whatever you want.
No.
That's back to carb cycling. That's back to, having a plan around that. And that's a really important, piece to it. The adaptive thermogenesis, and I've talked about this, if you lose, I said this before, if you lose 10% of your body mass or body weight, you can expect to see a substantial drop, like 25% in your energy expenditure over 24 hours. So one of the things that plays a big role in this is leptin. And we've talked about leptin a fair bit. Now, leptin, we know, comes from fat cells, right? And so there's a direct relationship, let's call it a correlation between, it's not really more of a causation than a correlation, but there's a direct relationship between how big your fat cells are, not how big your fat cells are, and leptin. And when you lose fat, you have an impact on leptin. Simple as that. So the thing that, I'll come back to leptin in a minute, but I want to talk, so thyroid function, right? So a lot of females are really in this space, right? They're like, my thyroid hormones are all over the shop. What do I do about it, right? And so we know thyroid hormone increases energy expenditure. We know that it plays a role in heart rate, blood pressure, muscle ATP consumption, the whole works, right? So thyroid hormone, people who are deficient, they're hypertensive, they're lethargic, generally. They tend to gain weight, while a hyper or a high thyroid patient or person is going to be the opposite. They're going to be hypertensive. Now, thyroid gland produces mainly thyroxine, which is your T4. Mm-hmm. Everyone probably familiar with that term. Now, it's got a pretty low biological activity. When the body removes one of the outer rings of iodine with, it doesn't matter about this, but T4 is modified to its active form, which is T3, effectively. Now, that increases thyroid hormone activity. T3 has about 100-fold greater affinity for thyroid hormone receptors than T4. So it's a really critical step. And it's actually catalyzed by a couple of bidothione, thymine deiodidases, which are just enzymes, D1, D2. So they have a role in the conversion of T3 to another one. There's a T2, that exists and converting T4 to what's called reverse T3. Now, that's all pretty involved, but weight loss and the maintenance of reduced body weight are associated with decreased circulating levels of T3 and increased circulating levels of reverse T3. Reverse T3 is a bio-inactive form of thyroid hormone. Doesn't play it like it's an inactive form. So what that means is that a lot of the weight loss results are increased by peripheral conversion. What we want is the conversion of T4 to T3 actively, right? So thyroid releasing hormone, we call it TRH. It's stimulated pituitary thyroid by the thyroid stimulating hormone. Now, just caloric restriction on its own won't have a big impact on that.
Okay.
It's pretty consistent with that. But T3 regulates a couple of pathways. One's, we've talked about this, it's called the rapamycin pathway, which is your mTOR pathway. And then there's another one, it's called an uncoupling 2 protein. It's a UCP2, happens in the hypothalamus. It's actually the arcuate nucleus of the hypothalamus. We call it the ARC. And it modulates thermogenic programming actually in brown fat tissue. And we've talked a lot about brown fat. Brown fat's got high mitochondrial density. That's why it's brown. It's actually beige fat that's high in mitochondria. Anyway, it does that via an enzyme called AMPK, which a lot of people will be familiar. It's called the AMP activated protein kinase. Now, that all happens in another part of the hypothalamus called the ventromedial nucleus. Doesn't really matter. It's in your hypothalamus, which is why it's really important. Now, when we get changes in that, well, put it this way. When we get a lack of an increase in thyroid stimulating hormone with weight loss, we often see no real change in circulating concentrations of T3. What does that mean? It means that leptin, I'll come back to leptin. So leptin, when leptin is low, when we have a low satiety. I can never say that word, satiety. We're hungry, right? So low leptin reduces a couple of things. I won't get too deep in the weeds, but it reduces a number of mechanisms within the hypothalamus that then kick in some way to overcome that because the body's trying to work towards getting fat again. Really fundamentally. And I've talked about thermogenesis and non-shivering thermogenesis and shivering thermogenesis. If anyone wants to talk about that, just go and listen to the previous podcast. And it's got to do with how many mitochondria.
Was that the hacks? Was that
recovery
hacks?
That was in one of the recovery ones. Yeah.
Sleeping nude with the windows open.
That's right. You remember that?
I do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Tough way to lose weight.
100%.
Especially when taking on leptin all day.
Yeah. So what we want is this active T3. All right. So moderate weight loss from caloric restriction will result in often with a drop in T3, but it doesn't affect any other hormones within the thyroid family as much. So I guess what I'm saying, and I hope I haven't lost anyone too much, it's really complicated it's not just about caloric restriction. There's a whole range of variables that have to do with fat mass that have a downstream effect on hypothalamic function, and that has it also have a role on thyroid function as well. High cortisol, right? High stress hormones like cortisol will decrease the conversion of T4 to T3.
Okay.
Right? That's a problem, right? And so, but what cortisol will also do is increase the conversion of T4 to reverse T3, which is inactive T3. What does that mean? It means that overall, by decreasing thyroid hormone production, cortisol will have almost like a blocking effect on our metabolism, and it'll block our ability to burn fat.
Okay.
And that's on the back of what it does to T3 and T4. Yep. I kind of can sum it up like that.
It's a good cortisol podcast too.
Yeah, we did one. Yeah.
Nasty.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It's pretty nasty. So leptin is a big player, right? Because leptin has a role on energy balance effectively. So plasma leptin levels increase with weight gain and they decrease with weight loss, or fat loss specifically. And so there is this really direct relationship between leptin levels and adipose tissue and how much the size of stores the amount of body fat. Leptin has has receptors in the hypothalamus to inhibit hunger, basically, and stimulate satiety. So when we don't have that, or when we have a drop in our body fat, the leptin levels will continue to work to make us hungry, basically, right? And we're coming back to that set point, which is, some people call it an adipostat. So it's like a fat thermostat. And so there's a couple of other really complicated pathways called the pre-opio-melanocortin, which is a POMC, and then there's another one called a melanocyte stimulating hormone. Doesn't really matter, but what they do is they will also play a role in appetite control and energy homeostasis. Have you glazed over? Yeah. Anyway.
Mate, you're digging deep then.
Well, there's two things. Leptin, in the lateral hypothalamus, leptin will inhibit hunger. right? And it does that through a few things. It affects the thing called neuropeptide Y. I don't know if we've heard about it. We talked about that. Yeah. Neuropeptide Y is interesting because its synthesis and release is regulated by leptin, insulin, glucocorticoids like cortisol, and ghrelin. Neuropeptide Y drives hunger. Yep. Simple as that. In the medial hypothalamus, leptin stimulates satiety. Yeah. Right. So it inhibits hunger and tells us we're not hungry anymore. So anyway, there's a couple of things there that are a key for us. Kind of circling back to the whole conversation, there's a number of other variables that affect.
You could probably talk for days.
Yeah, and I kind of don't want to get too lost in it, but
yeah, this was a simple one.
Well, yeah. So let's bring it right back, right? Yep. So if we bring it back to the consistency piece, we bring it back to, information is power.
Absolutely.
So we can, there's what I would say to people who are struggling is if you can just get consistency across what you're doing. A lot of people think they've got thyroid problems and may or may not have that. And one of the things that anyone who knows anything about hormones will tell you that it's not a single snapshot of one hormone that is important.
Absolutely.
It is the interaction of hormones.
Yep.
And so where you can get good information from educated people who can give you that profile. Now,
and what is an educated person in that profile?
It's got to be.
What are they?
Well, they've got to be medicos.
Yep.
I know there's a lot of people out there in the industry who have good knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not trying to sort of suggest they shouldn't, but the reality is that personal trainers aren't trained how to read blood tests, and they're not hormonal specialists, right? They can have a working knowledge of these things.
Absolutely.
But if you want an accurate determination, and if you want to be able to do something about it, you need medicos or people with PhDs in the area who are
absolutely
got specialised sort of knowledge about it. And that's not. I'm definitely not trying to belittle anyone because they might be able to flag something like your PT,
and that's really important.
Yeah, they're the red flag, and they'll go, look.
Absolutely.
The important thing is about scope of practice, right? And they'll go, I may not know the answer here. This is the thing. I know when I don't know the answer, and I'll say, I don't know the answer. You need to go and talk to Greg Young because he'll know. Whereas not everyone wants to do that because we all want to think, come across to our clients like we know everything. You don't have to be like that. I mean, you want to be part of I always think of myself as part of a group of multidisciplinary experts who, if I don't know, the key for me is to know who I can ask.
Absolutely. That's the big key.
Yeah. And so that's where you want good information because, like I said, a lot of girls out there think they've got thyroid problems. They may or may not. They may, in which case, if they genuinely do, you want to know about it because they, you want to be able to manage that appropriately.
What are they testing for if they believe they do have?
Oh, they'll look at the whole profile. T3, T4, reverse T3, TSH, the whole works. Yep. Yeah. But then look into...
Will a GP do all those?
For sure. For sure. Yeah. And then I'm into the reproductive hormones, but not from a reproductive perspective, but around estrogen, progesterone, androgen profile in females and their testosterone levels, growth hormone levels, IGF-1, all that stuff. Yeah. You want to get as much information as you possibly can. If you're a trained female who's been in that world for a long time, and particularly any females that might have taken, performance enhancing substances, because it's pretty common, right? Like,
I have no idea.
Well, it is. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty common.
I know what you're talking about.
Well, we don't go there because it's sort of beyond what we're talking about here, but we can't be that naive to think that it doesn't happen, right? So, but if you're a female and you've been taking, thyroxine to get on stage and you've done four comps in a year and you've mixed that in with, your clenbuterols and everything else in the world and your growth hormones and your IGF-1s, you can be pretty sure that there's been some adaptation that's occurred, and you really do want to know about that because there's a lot of things in life in your human body that are forgiving. Your thyroid isn't one, and that would be my sort of precautionary tale or cautionary tale to anyone in this space. It's like male bodybuilders taking insulin.
Yep.
Your pancreas isn't that forgiving, and your thyroid is less forgiving. And if you damage your thyroid, it's damaged for life. And so you've got to be really careful with that stuff. And, anyway, so consistency, preparation, planning, hopefully we covered off on that fat set point thing and gave people some understanding about that. How do you overcome that? You overcome that by reverse dieting. So the reverse dieting piece is really common. And there's a couple of different strategies around that. Some people, again, I mentioned Lane Norton, there's a couple of other people that have taken hold of that. Because what people have traditionally done is done a comp or a challenge, got to the end of it and, binge eating and you end up fat, right? Fatter, yeah. Yep. We've already talked about, you've now got more fat cells. So you're going to put yourself in a bad position. Anyway, so hopefully that's of some value to people. I kind of went on for a fair while, but...
Oh, mate, that was interesting. I mean, I probably would like to close off with a little strategy for people who aren't competition
Yeah.
athletes, like somebody who just wants to lose 10 kilos because the doctor said you should lose 10 kilos. Like,
Yeah. So
obviously the same thing, start with consistency.
Yeah, it starts with consistency. Again, it comes back to the same things in your arsenal. You've got your nutrition, you've got some supplementation you can work with, you've got your training. They're your three go-tos. Like I said, for me, it's about the least most invasive issues that you can bring to your day. And it might be something as subtle as, removing
We talked about some
egg yolks or whatever it might be. It might be less sauce on your food. It might be don't sprinkle sugar all over what you eat. It
take
can be
sugar out of your coffee.
whatever it might be,
little things,
little things, they'll have a big impact. But we come down to this, realistically, if you want to lose fat and keep it off, you've got to lose it and keep it off. So this fluctuation of body weight is what you've got to try and avoid.
Big thing I took was lose it, reset yourself, 6 months.
And go again.
New goal, go again.
Yep.
Nice.
And then if in that 6 months, those habits, those behaviors that you've implemented become habits. And once it's a habit, you don't even think about it anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so it's easy then for you to maintain. It's only, a problem if it's 20 different things that is a huge task for you to implement. And then,
that's like any project or any job or anything you do,
You just want to remove the room for error.
Exactly.
Like, if it's just a subtle change in your diet and you're already training. This is the other thing, and I probably should mention this, is one of the things I see with girls who they might be amenorrheic, right? So, but they go, no, I'm eating pretty well. Like I'm having 2,500 calories a day, right? And I'm going, but you're doing 1,000 calories in exercise. You're still doing 4 hours a day on the treadie. That's the same thing.
Yep.
So often, and this is the mind challenge for people. It's okay, I'm terrified of putting on weight. So, they don't want to put on weight, but they want to get their hormones back to normal. You can't always have it both ways.
Yep.
So I'm not talking about putting on 10 kilos of fat. It might be 1 or 2 kilos. That, hardly noticeable.
Yep.
You don't have veins in your abs anymore, but you're probably not supposed to, most of the year. It's not just the diet. It's the nutrition and it's the training and use supplements. Use the thermogenics, use things like that, because you can do them round the clock. There's no problem.
Nice.
All right.
Mate, that was good. That was why people struggle to lose fat 101.
Cool.
I would hate to hear the advanced one. I'd probably have to have Google open to do that.
We'll probably take the thyroid stuff out of it.
No, that's it. No, it's staying in, mate. That's all really interesting stuff for us to talk about. We've got a plan coming out soon, mybodyscience.com.au. It's developed by dietitians and nutritionists working together. The nutritionist took that at the end because there was a few things I wanted to add to it. I love my dietitians though.
Yes.
But there's food swaps, all types of things. Tells you calories, gives you your basic macros, and it's free. Get on board.
Awesome.